This was started by parents. It is still the same parents who are involved, making sure that the recipes and the production and manufacturing process are the same as when we did it on our stovetop.
You are listening to The Dr. Haley Show, the podcast dedicated to helping you optimize your health. Each episode, there will be an interview or a message to help you discover better health. We will be featuring health radicals on the show to bring new ideas to the table, as well as doubling down on key fundamentals to support you living your best life. Your host is no other than the founder of Haley Nutrition, Dr. Michael Haley.
This is the Dr. Haley Show podcast, and I'm Dr. Michael Haley, your show host. Today we have some special guests off of the show Shark Tank with their brand Jackson's potato chips. You guys, thank you for joining me on the show. Megan and Scott Reamer, founders of Jackson's. I understand that you guys were on Shark Tank, and you'll be my first guests that actually got a deal. Is that correct?
Yes, we did. In fact, I was just texting our shark yesterday, so it's good timing here. But yes, we did get a deal. It was successful.
I actually tried to do a little research, and I saw a snip on your website. Is it snackjacksons.com, if I recall?
Yes, correct.
And in the About Us, or Who We Are, there was like a minute and a half. Is the whole episode online somewhere where our audience could tune into it?
Yes. I mean, all I ever do is Google it. So,
oh yeah,
which is never. I don't watch myself on it often, but when I know, like people, they do reruns for sure. We've had a lot of replays of the episode, which unfortunately we never really know when it's going to re-air. We see that outcome in our sales. Like we always have this boost online for sure of sales, but the longer link is, I think, just like you Google it, right, Scott?
Yeah, we can make the link available in show notes, etc., with a password. It's a full 12 minutes.
Yeah.
So we'll try to make
12 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, we'll try to make that available.
Yeah, it's funny because I found another one that was like 4 or 5 minutes long, and I thought, no, there's got to be more to it than this. And I'm guessing that you were probably in the Shark Tank studio for a lot longer.
An hour.
And they trimmed it down to
yes.
Just a handful of minutes.
Yeah, and we were lucky because they came and did a home segment, and so we had more time on the beginning of our episode as well that shared some of our story, our son's story for sure, and this beautiful place where we live in Colorado, in the mountains of Colorado. So it is quite this extended video for us and exposure for Jackson's.
Okay. And I did not get your son's story, and I definitely want it. What happened and what brought you to start this particular brand?
Yeah, I guess I'll give you some of that backstory. So Jackson was our oldest child. We have 4 kids, and he, the long and the short of it is he had this rare autoimmune disease, and that was the final diagnosis, but it took 12 years to get to that diagnosis. And so he started sort of displaying symptoms when he was about 2. He was just this healthy, typical toddler, walking, talking. We already had another child at that point. They're 18 months apart. And so he started to display some just muscle weakness. And over the next 3 years, that muscle weakness that started in his feet spread up his body, and he lost his ability to walk and eventually talk. And so, we were watching this progression of symptoms and regression of skills that looked very much like MS or ALS, and frantically taking him around the country, not being able to find this diagnosis that, again, started when he was 2, and he finally got a diagnosis when he was 14 years old through this very, sort of specific program at the National Institute of Health. It was an undiagnosed disease program. And it's really this last resort and last stop for people who've gone through this journey like our son did, where you've just maxed out your local hospital, your local specialty children's hospital for us, and then multiple hospitals around the country and multiple tests. And so Jackson's as a brand started as a byproduct of that, because when we didn't have any answers for what was happening with him, we just sort of started looking at his diet as a way to try to manage symptoms. And the symptoms that we saw were neurological and they were GI, and they were very closely tied together. And then, what our sort of overarching goal was in trying to manage symptoms and do that through his diet was to control inflammation. Really, it was like, kind of bucketing fats, carbs, and proteins into types of foods and quantities of foods that would increase or decrease inflammation in his body. That was like our baseline.
And that's the only thing at that point that doctors could confidently say, is that there's some inflammatory process taking place. They didn't know the genesis of it or the pathologies of it, but they knew there was one underway. And so we took that one data point and said, okay, how can we possibly intermediate in whatever this pro-inflammatory process is? And that's when we got to work on, as Megan just said, all of his macros, what drives inflammation in the body, what food sources are pro-inflammatory, anti-inflammatory, et cetera, et cetera. So we went down that rabbit hole pretty quickly because it was the only thing we could cling to.
Yeah.
It's a heartbreaking story, and I'm, well, you'll have me emotional on here because I have 4 kids, and we've seen some suffering, but nothing that compares at all to what you've been through.
Well, thank
I
you.
appreciate you saying that. Yeah. It was existentially challenging. There was an 18-month period there where he didn't sleep for more than 2 hours. And, he would wake up crying every 2 hours.
Well, I mean, he was losing his nerve function, like actively losing. And so he was in a lot of pain. And so thank you for just your condolences around his story. And certainly, for us, we started this. So, once Jackson got a diagnosis, he very quickly, like within a year, became part of this experimental drug trial. And it's actually what he ended up passing away from. He'd been on it for about 15 months, and then we increased the dose, and he died within just a few weeks of increasing the dose. And so he was 16 years old when that happened. And so we started this company when he was, 13? When he was maybe even younger, 12,
12,
around 12.
12, that's right.
Just because we knew that this had worked for him. We had information to share. We weren't trying to be sort of, preachers about this. We were just trying to share what had worked for our family. And we knew, he was one extreme of this medical challenge and medical journey. But what we ended up finding when we opened this up and, started Jackson's, and certainly talking about his story, was that there were a lot of people for various reasons along that path, where if he was sort of at one end, there were a lot of places that it intersected with people's stories, and whether they were medically trying to contain or understand something in their home, or behaviorally, or, even just maybe something more, I don't want to call it superficial because it feels like a big deal, but something that is maybe a skin issue, right? Eczema, something that they were looking at diet to try to manage. And so for us, that was really rewarding to interact with people who responded and resonated with this story in whatever way, in some capacity, that made starting Jackson's feel very purposeful and impactful. And then that certainly held a lot of, a much stronger meaning for us and the rest of our family with our children once he passed away, that we were creating this legacy really for him, and that he still lived in our daily lives and in people's interaction with him through this product.
I don't think I'll be able to eat another Jackson's potato chip without thinking of him.
Well, thank you. That's important for us. That's all the meaning for us.
Appreciate you saying that. I mean, as you well know, Dr. Haley, inflammation is the mediator for so many diseases of modern man. We didn't appreciate that because we were just looking at an N of 1 experiment with Jackson and saw profound changes, particularly in his quality of his life and sleeping and happiness through this low inflammation diet. And to Megan's credit, she said, we cannot hold or husband this information. If this is valuable, that we could reverse engineer over 24 months a diet that was in fact low inflammation, which the National Institutes of Health PhD MDs confirmed on his diagnosis. They said, hey, congratulations. It was a profoundly important moment as parents for us. Congratulations. You found the lowest inflammation diet you can give a person and still have them be healthy. And up until then, it was mostly just us, following contrarian logic, and just it worked for Jackson. That's all we cared about. But as Megan had mentioned, when we opened this story, started the brand, opened the story to many more people, we realized there are many, many people, as Megan just mentioned, who are experiencing some level of inflammation along some very wide spectrum, from relatively trivial to catastrophic in Jackson's case, where diet and intermediating on that basis is a possibly profound benefit to them. And so that's what became the fuel for the many, many restless nights of actually starting a business in a hyper-competitive category. It was what kept us going in those darker, more challenging moments of entrepreneurship.
That's amazing. And for everyone listening, I'm going to reiterate right now kind of the take-home message. Inflammation really is the start of all illness and disease. And even without a diagnosis, you can do something about it. And there's no better time to start than right now if you're not living that lifestyle. We have so many choices we can make with our food, consuming anti-inflammatory foods. If you were to kind of sum up what you've learned about food and inflammation, a general guideline, what would you avoid and what would you consume more of?
That's a good question.
That is a good
While you think of
question.
specifics, I'll say just very generally, the more ingredients and the more processed it is, generally speaking, the more pro-inflammatory it's going to be. The fewer ingredients, less processed, or the more gently processed, up to and including raw, of course, the less inflammatory it will be, the less inflammatory load it will put on your body. So without, Megan, you maybe want to talk about specifics, but for sure that is sort of became our overarching theme. And then we dug much more deeply into that, into, as Megan mentioned, specific macros. And within macros, like within carbohydrates, well, are sweet potatoes better than white potatoes? Well, yes, at least for our experiment, for Jackson's health. And so we got more and more granular. And that's what Megan really wanted to share with the world, and really had to drag me into it, because the snack food business is unbelievably competitive and extraordinarily difficult to succeed in. And I was reticent to do that. I said, let's find other ways to share this story. And she said, nothing is going to be more powerful than this. 85% of all human beings, eat snack foods once a month. Let's use snack foods as a manner in which to speak about this story and the lessons we learned, and that Jackson suffered through in that reverse engineering project. Kudos to her for recognizing that. But maybe you want to speak about some of the specific foods.
No, I don't. I think one of the easiest take-home messages is, there are swaps you can do that make a difference. And I'll use chips as an example. If you enjoy eating chips, like, look at the type of input it is, look at the type of carb, and look at the type of oil. And you can swap that out for a healthier, sort of lower inflammatory version option, and it tastes just as great. And so I think what we struggled with in the beginning was that there weren't a lot of those swaps available, not nearly as many as there are now. But you can continue to eat the foods you like and elevate the ingredient deck.
For Jackson's,
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, when it came to potatoes, my initial swap was, getting the toaster type oven. What's it called? Where you air fry things?
Air fryer, yeah.
And we shop at Costco, so I picked one up from there, and we sliced up some potatoes. And the problem is, when you do them thin like potato chips, you can only put so many on a shelf. You can't, mass produce them in your little toaster oven at home.
Yes.
But that's what we started doing. And then we thought, these would be better if they were a little crunchy. So let's start putting a little healthy oil on them. But again, we're making, it's like, we'll fight over the 2 trays, and it's not working.
Yes. Well, it's funny you
When
bring that up because when we started this, Scott, I laughed when Scott was saying that, I said something about how often people eat snack food. I was not nearly that clinical or scientific or data driven about it. I was just like, I like snack food. Lots of people like snacks. So let's just start this company. And he was way more sort of business focused and logical about it. But I think, that's really the beginning of where we thought we had a version of a potato chip that tasted good and we knew had this great oil in it and some great ingredients because we would make them and they would be consumed so quickly, right? We'd have people over for dinner, our kids and their friends, like they would just like, we need more chips. Like, let's have more chips. You need to make some more chips. And we were, even in the beginning of Jackson's, we were making them by hand for almost a year and bagging them and sealing them and shipping them. And we could not keep up with the demand. So there you go, Dr. Haley. Maybe you need to start some like a chip business with air frying them and see how it goes.
No, why would I do that? Why would I do if I can just pick up a bag of them at Costco?
Well, we
Uh,
kind of were like, why isn't someone making these in this, what we're doing at a mass scale and why, like, we can't keep up with
Right.
this. And we kind of kept waiting for somebody else, another brand to do it. And they didn't.
That was my excuse to Megan. I'm like, oh, somebody else is going to do this. We don't have to solve for this. Like the market is efficient. Someone's going to see this opportunity and solve it for us. And it just didn't happen. And I was like, eventually, gosh, maybe you're right. We have to do this.
You enjoying the show thus far? One of the many health secrets that we have covered on the show is all around aloe vera, specifically drinking raw aloe vera. Our aloe vera has helped our customers effectively heal their gut, increase their intestine health, lower inflammation in the body, eliminate and/or decrease acid reflux, have glowing skin and hair, and so much more. Now, as a frequent member of our audience, you will be exposed to exclusive specials and coupon codes for the awesome products manufactured by Haley Nutrition. That's right, for simply being awesome and tuning in. You can get a mini discount to help you optimize and better your health. To see how we can help and support you on your health journey, tune into the episodes and listen for coupon codes that you can use at www.haleynutrition.com before you make your orders of raw aloe vera. Once again, it's www.haleynutrition.com. Now, back to the show.
looking at your ingredients, it's like, wait a second, those are my ingredients. And we actually used an avocado oil, and we tried other oils, but avocado was the one that seemed to work the best. And we would use either a sea salt or a pink salt. And then eventually that evolved into, there's this spice that we found at Costco called butt rub. And now it's like barbecue potato chips.
Oh, that's yummy. That's
But
good.
Inaptly named.
Yeah, it's
We used to make
mostly organic ingredients.
Nice.
it makes me laugh a little, not laugh, I don't think that's the right word, but I see, tallow is really popular right now in tallow products and certainly in face products. And we used to make them in lard and tallow initially.
We tried all the ancestral oils, and thank goodness we tried them all, because then I would figure out the supply chain for tallow in 2012. It was like impossible. Like literally, we could not scale this beyond like 10 bags a day. There was no way we could sell this many because the supply chain just simply didn't exist. And so thank goodness, it's one of the things I think is wonderful that in the last decade, we've seen the supply chain for avocado oil go from really quite a niche market with not very many providers to a significant market with worldwide options. And that's good for everybody, right? One of our sub goals, other than sharing Jackson's story and this profound insight about how food can support an anti-inflammatory ethos or lifestyle, is that we wanted to help bring back a marketplace for these sort of lost oils, right? These ancestral fats that had largely, for economic reasons, been driven out of the food chain. And it was a long project, of course, a decade plus in the making, but we can't be more excited that there are now major suppliers of avocado oil around the world. And we played one small part in helping consumers demand that in the marketplace. And in fact, it was some of our first pitches to the buyers at, say, Whole Foods or natural grocers, some of our original first distributors and retail partners was, please give your consumers a choice. Because right now, when they go down that aisle, all choices are canola, sunflower, safflower, cottonseed oil, soybean oil, et cetera. And I remember, many of those buyers were like, wait a minute, you're right. There are no choices other than those polyunsaturated seed oils down that aisle. And I said, just give us 4 feet just for that one extra choice that is fundamentally different than these other polyunsaturated fats. And it was part of our original pitch. We're super proud that we've attempted and succeeded at some level in changing the food supply chain.
I've never heard the term ancestral oils, but I know that you're referring to things like, not only the avocado, the coconut, possibly tallow and ghee and things like that are more saturated. And why are you deciding on saturated fats?
So I was a chemical engineer undergrad, and so part of our research for Jackson's particular disease, again, an experiment N of 1, was and we just reverse engineered this. When we gave him these polyunsaturated fats, he just wouldn't respond well. As Megan said, there was a huge nexus between his GI and his neurological symptoms. So if we gave him a piece of candy, he'd have neurological symptoms within 2 hours, easily, because that stuff is metabolized and you have an insulin response, pretty quickly, 15 minutes basically in your blood. And we saw some similar reaction to polyunsaturated seed oils for Jackson. And we thought, okay, well, I don't necessarily know why. Let's just take those out of his diet. Eventually, I sort of, why would that be? And so we did a bunch of research on why that might be and realized that monounsaturated fats, olive oil, avocado oil, and saturated fats, coconut oil, for instance, and butter is also sort of monounsaturated, that these things generally do not promote an inflammatory response. And Jackson's physiology was so sensitive to any changes in his inflammatory response, any insults to it, that we would see that immediately. Many other folks, could suffer for that days, weeks, months, maybe years and never see any symptoms, but his symptoms came on immediately. And so we simply said, well, we can't give him those because it affects quite negatively his quality of life. And so it was only afterwards that we realized the science behind that monounsaturated and saturated fats, when heated, are much, much more stable. They don't break down into aldehydes and other sort of insults to your body. They literally molecularly change, and polyunsaturated fats, do so. And those breakdown products are what you're sort of responding to when they enter your bloodstream. And so that was what we learned only afterwards. But all we really cared about is that he was happy and thriving. And on saturated and monosaturated fats, he was.
Yeah, I'm smiling because you're speaking my language, and you and I could probably completely geek out and talk about, the cis fats and how they become trans fats, and how this breaks and other things join onto them. And
this is exactly what I would say to the buyer at Whole Foods when he or she would say, "Well, why? Why? Okay, I understand the choice element, but what is going on chemically here?" From a lipid chemistry standpoint. And I literally would go to the whiteboard and I'd be drawing stuff out. I would draw the bonds and they'd be like, wow, incredible. Like we won the SoCal region of Whole Foods on the basis of what you just said and describing those bonds on a whiteboard in SoCal, California.
That's great. I love it. People, there are a difference, and the saturated fats are more stable. They don't have those bonds that can be broken and twisted and changed into something other than what they are. I think of people read the scriptures and they talk about, olive oil being, well, it's a biblical food, but probably in its purest, unprocessed, not heated, fresh form. The more we use it and cook and change things, it changes. So let's talk about potato chips, because there's probably a lot of brands out there. There's probably some sweet potato chips, and then there's sweet potato chips. What's in the ingredients? How are you going to have to worry if RFK makes changes? And will some of your competitors have to worry about possibly what's in their bags of chips?
I can't speak for the competitors, but I think one of the most important decisions we made about getting into this business is that we did so as parents, not business people, right? So we produced products that we would want to feed our kids, full stop. And then we figured out the economics afterwards and the efficiency of the supply chain and how you manufacture them. It was and remains an unbelievably difficult undertaking to start on the basis of nutrition and what you'd feed your kids, and then figure out all of the economic supply chain, the manufacturing, all that sort of stuff. Most folks get into this, on the manufacturing side, and then they cut the corners on the nutrition. We did the exact opposite. And there were times where we thought that was going to put us out of business. I assure you that there were times where we can't keep doing this. Like it's,
just the costs and,
the
the economics of it were challenging for quite a long time. And so I think to Scott's message and point is that we've always remained true to the values and the mission around why we started and the sort of narrative around that. And I don't want that to sound fabricated at all, but that is we've always led with Jackson, his story, his disease, who we are as his parents, and those other pieces have kind of fallen into place behind that. And so that feels more true than ever, particularly politically, with what some of the conversation is around analyzing seed oils or conversations around seed oils, or at least a recognition around, a certain type of ingredient in products, right? And so,
for sure,
for us, I think it's a great position to be in, and a great conversation to be generating for consumers.
Yeah, I think you're in a good position too. I've looked at the ingredients and other people using the other kind of oils. I think that could be a problem for them. Who knows?
Yeah.
Consumers are definitely asking and talking about it. And I think for us, when we first started, we had these small pockets of consumers that, for instance, kind of paleo and CrossFit were big when we started, right? I mean, certain brands like RX Bar built their whole brand on the CrossFit community and engaging with them. And so for us, they were very early adopters of our product because they got it. They were already reading labels for ingredients, particularly oils. And so I think for us in the past, even 24 months, we have seen these smaller pockets of consumers who are asking certain questions, looking at ingredients for certain types of oils or not having certain types of oils in, that has continued to increase that conversation. Those pockets of consumers are becoming larger. And so it's almost this sort of round two of what we saw when we first launched in where consumers' attentions are.
That's a great point. There were probably a dozen different zip codes around the nation. Before we had any retail distribution, we would make these chips for weeks and sell out in 10 minutes. But they would generally go to certain zip codes, right? Like Austin, Texas, Seattle,
Oregon,
California, San Francisco Bay Area,
West
Massachusetts, in Boston and areas like that. So it was really these super niche progressive communities. And now, by virtue of the fact that we're in Costco, it tells you that it's a far more national understanding and awareness, as Megan said, about the importance of ingredients. And that's nothing but good. I mean, we could not be more proud to have played a small role in that process of educating the consumer base on the choices, as you are through your podcast, Dr. Haley, the choices they can make to positively influence all manner of their lives.
Yeah, I'm actually in the nutrition business too. And I'm in Florida. Where are you guys shipping from?
Oh, we ship from our plant. We have a plant in Milwaukee, 20 miles west of Milwaukee.
Okay. Being here in Florida and catering to people in the gut health market, I ship more to California than I do to my own state here in Florida. So there are definitely, pockets of people that are changing faster ahead of the rest of the population when it comes to their food decisions.
Yes, we very much saw that in what Scott was talking about.
Yeah.
Florida was our last state that we went into.
Truly, it was. It was the last state we won in Whole Foods, in the 13 regions of Whole Foods. Florida was the hardest and last get.
Yeah, I'm not going to speak for all of Florida, but there's a lot of people that are more interested in looking healthy than actually being healthy.
Sure.
It just is what it is.
Sure.
Now, your shark is still with you.
Yes, Rohan Oza is our shark. Yes, Rohan just had a pretty big deal happen last week. I don't know if you heard about this Poppy Pepsi purchase, but Pepsi acquired Poppy, which is a functional beverage brand with prebiotics in it. So a prebiotic
Hmm.
soda, I think is fair as far as what they build themselves. They were another couple that he found on Shark Tank, and um, they exited last week and maybe like a what
1.2.
1 plus $1 billion deal. So Rohan, yeah, he's great. He was we were his first deal on his first episode, like first time he
What
was
year
on
was
Shark
that?
Tank. He was a guest shark.
When were you on?
2017.
October of 2017.
Okay. Wow, that was a while ago. So you've had plenty of time to make some tough business decisions.
Yes, we actually.
Does he influence you?
He,
I mean, he's been essential at all of the critical points in our life cycle, our evolution. He's been there to help. The company would not be in position today without Rohan Oza. Full stop.
yeah, he's. I would say he doesn't maybe interact in the daily sort of, defining what's our plan at Costco? What are we going to do? What's the packaging look like? Right? Like certainly provides some opinion and value and perspective on that. But I think in sort of the big scheme of some of the things that we've done since he's been a shark, yes, for sure. And, I think he's been just a great sort of opinion, narrative, perspective. I'm not sure what the right word is
Counselor.
around a counselor
Well-
advisor around CPG specifically and consumer packaged goods, which is a really hard business.
Remember, we're parents with a side hustle as entrepreneurs and business people. And so he's forgotten more about consumer packaged goods than we'll ever have learned. And so that's one of the reasons why we felt it was so necessary to say yes to his offer, right? In the show, we sort of go back and forth about what percentage and how much money. And at the end of the day, though, Megan and I were very clear and in alignment that the company would be better off with his involvement. And that has turned out to be 100% true, that assumption.
Yeah, there's wisdom in the counsel of many, but some people have more wisdom than others. And someone like him who's done it and has been successful, absolutely. What are some of the hard decisions that you've had to make?
Oh, I can tell you one right off the top of my head. We had a lot of products, actually. We had potato chips, then we expanded into tortilla chips. We were starting to introduce sort of a grain-free puff. We probably had
26.
yeah,
SKUs.
26, right? Between
26 SKUs.
flavors, type, bag sizes, and it kind of expanded a little bit more from that when you factored in snack size and all these things we were trying to do. It was too much. Like it was just, we from the beginning, our best selling product were sweet potato chips. And, one of the things I think we all came to this realization and looked at a lot of data and analysis, like the proper analysis, was that we were a sweet potato chip company first and foremost. Like that was our product that we were selling well, that we needed to try to innovate around with different bag sizes, different seasonings, different flavors. No other brands had been pairing flavors with sweet potato. And, that was something that we felt we could do really well. And the team we have in place in Milwaukee, in Wisconsin, are just sort of this amazing version of that. And so we pulled back all those other products. We took them off the shelf, which was a really hard, we basically contracted the business. And it was a really hard thing to do at that point in time, revenue wise, distribution, the traction we'd gotten after Shark Tank and visibility to not be continuing to expand, but to pull back. And that was one of the hardest decisions we made, right? to innovate and refine this process to, have our own manufacturing operation and build that up and stand that up, and then go sort of pull our distribution where you really weren't able to find us anywhere. Take the time to almost like relaunch and rebrand the business, and then go back to market, and fingers crossed, have this experience that we're having now, which is consumers finding us, consumers recognizing us, old consumers standing by us, and old retailers standing by us through that process. And then, sort of having this new awareness and bringing these new consumers and retailers into our business. And so, it was really this relaunch and rebrand of the product.
And during that time, we found, just the perfect capital partners who understood that vision, brought an institutional discipline to the business, and very much supported what Megan just said. And outside of Rohan, they have been the other folks that have been essential to our success. Up until that point, we were using co-packers around the nation that we developed relationships and had great relationships with, but that's a very different and much more difficult model financially. And these folks said, you know what, we should have our own facility where we control the quality assurance. We can ship where we want, when we want. We control the entire process. That was an absolute game changer. And we could not have done that without these capital providers.
It's really a true partnership, I'd say. Great people.
I trust you're enjoying this podcast. So that you can enjoy it even more, throughout April of 2025, get $10 off your purchase of $100 or more at HaleyNutrition.com. The coupon code is $10. That's 10BUCKS. You can use this coupon with on sale and already discounted bundled items. All right, enjoy the rest of the show. As you're talking about that, it's like, wow, that's where my business needs to go. I don't have necessarily a co-packer for our product, but it's essentially a farmer that produces for a lot of different brands. And you kind of go in there with your own specifications. We want you to produce our product kind of like this. Ours is really simple, so it's not really like it's not quite comparable. But I don't have my own processing facility in-house where I have complete quality control.
Yeah.
I have my equipment installed in someone else's farm.
Sure.
And they follow my process.
Yeah.
But it's neat that you got to that point where you could bring it in-house and have total quality control. I'm a little jealous.
Yeah, it's made a big difference for us. We, like Scott said, we had some really great manufacturing partners. We had some great farmer partners. We still do. And there's no real but about that. It just, for our model and what we were trying to do, and the process was really different than what they were used to. And so, the initial partner we found, co-manufacturer we found, it was in Denver. We live in Colorado, and this co-man was in Denver, which is about 200 miles from us. And when they first started working with us, like literally the first time, we'd been making these by hand. We knew it sort of very clearly and intimately, like what temperature we needed to cook these at, how long we needed, what the process was on a small scale, sort of like how to back into this larger scale production process. And it was much different than what they were used to. The frying time, the process by which the temperature was, right? And so when they first made them, they did them how they normally do, like very quick fry, very high temperature, and sent us a picture and said, they were burned to a crisp. They were black. And they said, is this, they looked like sort of this mouse. And, they said, is this what the quality? Like, is this what your chips look like? And we're like, oh my gosh, they're burnt. Like, no, what are you talking about?
And that's the point at which I realized, oh man, I am going to have to sleep at this place for the next 6 to 8 weeks to figure out this process.
Yeah,
and that's
quite a long
absolutely
time.
what happened. I had to go there and basically stay there days on end. And, just like Laverne and Shirley on that manufacturing line, I was in there picking stuff out, talking to the plant manager, like, oh, we have to adjust it. So,
which is a Wisconsin based show, if you ever remember it. But
I guess I'm dating myself.
But but that co-manufacturer was amazing for us. Like, They were a true partner. They gave us a shot because we had been making these by hand in our kitchen and we were parents, and he just loved our story and was like, and we had no business sort of being in that plant, right?
No
They were
business.
making product for Kroger and Trader
Yeah.
Joe's and, Boulder Canyon,
Utz.
big businesses. And
Yeah.
so without these partners, particularly on the manufacturing side, we would never have understood what we were doing. They were these connectors to farmers, to packaging suppliers, to, other retailers. I mean, they were fantastic partners for us. We just sort of outgrew isn't the right word. We just needed different economics to make this a profitable,
Right.
sustainable business.
Yeah. Which one of you was the researcher that decided to, get in deep and figure out what foods were healthy and which ones weren't?
Well, we both were. So
I would say that was more Scott.
But I want to understand the science. But Megan, her intuition about how Jackson would respond to them was, second to none. So, she would say, this, whatever this thing is, he's not responding well to that. And so I would take that observation and say, okay, well, what is it about this thing? What's in it? Read the labels, all that sorts of stuff, and then try to understand the physiology behind the metabolization of whatever that thing was. And so it was a great partnership in that way, that she would be the conduit through which those critical observations, would be made, and then I would try to understand what the underlying science was. So it couldn't have done either without the other.
That's perfect. Who are some of your influences? I'm going to guess Weston A.
Yes,
Price.
you're 100% correct. That book was like a Bible. Yeah, I will. That book, it was what really educated us around certainly the fats, proteins, and carbs, soaking grains, fermenting foods, right? Like, that was what we both needed, and more specifically Jackson needed at that point in time for surviving. Like, we were in survival crisis mode with him. No one could tell us what was wrong. He was actively getting worse, and he was tiny. He wasn't gaining weight. And so he was like 3 years old and probably 20 pounds, 21 pounds, right? Like, he was undernourished, eating a good diet that was at least not processed. That was, primarily gluten-free, certainly
Organic.
nothing added in there that were like dyes and preservatives or artificial coloring or anything, but still not gaining weight. And it was that sort of Nourishing Traditions and Weston A. Price group that had the information and sort of educational process for us that talked about the ratio of fats, proteins, and carbs, the types of fats, proteins, and carbs, and more specifically fats, because we knew that a diet heavier in fat for him was a significant changing point, like for his sleep pattern, for gaining weight, like any amount of weight. That was what worked for him. And so, yes, that was a primary early influencer for us. In fact, our first kind of show when we brought products to a market was at the Weston A. Price show.
It was our first trade show
in like 2012. And my daughter,
I may have been there. Was that in Dallas?
No, it was in like around San Jose, California.
Okay.
So it may have even been in 2011. No, it must have been around 12. I'll have to look. We were like in their Nourishing Traditions book, right? Of sources.
Of good products or acceptable
yes.
products.
And, Sally A. Falon was there. And I mean, I want to say that even, I want to say that the next one was where we met kind of the jerky folks, Epic, the people who started Epic Bar, Katie and Taylor, their names are, they were launching in that same space. Because you're preaching to the choir with that crowd around healthy fats, and
you don't have to walk it.
No, you're just sort of showing up with the product, and they already get it.
Yeah.
And
but for Jackson, there was a before and an after, and the after was when we saw in the back of Sally's book, the Nourishing Traditions, the meat-based formula, and we made that religiously. Infinite formula. Meat-based and some other stuff. It's a remarkable formula. It says simple and as nourishing a thing as you can get. And that's what we realized Jackson needed. He could not tolerate very wide range of foods. And so what is a narrow, simple thing we can do that packs the most nutritional density into it? And that's what we ended up feeding for 15 months nonstop. And
it's like a smoothie-ish.
Sort
of.
of?
No, it's not a smoothie.
No.
It's actually sort of, I was a little like...
The meat-based formula. That's
it's a meat-based formula. So it was sort of this
beef
like
liver.
The smell, because it was it's liver and you're grinding it up and
beef stock.
Like we were ordering marrow bones from like different farmers around the country because you couldn't go into a store, or it was not easy to find grass-fed marrow, right? Bones. And so then we'd cook those down and get the marrow out of them. And then we'd slow cook liver, which we also had to order and find a grass-fed beef liver supplier. And we would slow cook that over many hours so that it was basically pre-digested, and then add all of the oils into it. And it was a process, a daily production process and he loved it. He drank it up.
That's the part that was so amazing to me.
Yeah.
That he was in such an existential state from a nutritional standpoint that taste and those things did not matter. He wanted that stuff and he loved it because he knew something in his body knew, I need this thing. And, he never once was, I don't want that. He was, nope, I want it. Like,
and then when he stopped wanting it, he was healthier. Yeah. And we were like, okay, we can start adding other foods in here, right? And it was this very visible process. So yes, the answer to your question is Weston A. Price and Nourishing Traditions were our unbelievable
North Star.
Yeah.
Yep.
Was Sally Falon the author of Nourishing Traditions?
Yes.
That's what I thought. I had forgotten. It had been a long time since I've, not read, but referenced that book and pick and choose things out of it. Can't read everything. I was, one of my big influences was Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, who also attended many of those and the author of the GAPS diet, which, very similar alignment when it comes to food.
Yeah. Well, I think for us, one of the big aha moments was recognizing how closely related your GI health is and function, and the neurotransmitters located in your GI system and the brain and the central nervous system. And, we could see that very clearly with Jackson in these symptoms, but, sort of educating ourselves around that was pretty influential as well for us.
Wow. Well, this has been a super enjoyable conversation. Is there anything that I didn't ask that I left out? As we're getting short on time, I'm thinking, boy, we could go on for hours, especially now that we have the Weston A. Price discussion going. What would you really want to share with the people that we haven't discussed?
I think one of the things I want to impress upon folks is that, there is a sort of an underlying cynicism about the food chain and about brands and the consolidation that happens in those transactions. And are the products going to be the same after the companies get larger, or they start distributing into Costco, or they're purchased by somebody else? The reality is that, at least for us, for sure, this is the central mission of the company. No matter who's involved, no capital partners, no matter, if we sell internationally now, or we sell through Costco and Walmart and Target, nothing has changed behind the scenes. Like, our products are the same products that Megan and I made on our stovetop. They are the same. Yes, there's much more efficiency. We have a plant manager who's got a degree in chemical engineering, and he's a genius and, increasing yields and keeping costs down. So yes, it's become more sophisticated and complex a business, but the products are the same. So, no matter how small or large we get, the products are always going to be the same. And I understand that sort of cynicism, because sometimes you just don't know how the decisions are made and how the products are made. But in this instance, the thing I think we want to leave with people is that this was started by parents. It is still the same parents who are involved, making sure that the recipes and the production and manufacturing process are the same as when we did it on our stovetop. Our kids still eat with the same enthusiasm and frequency our products as when we made them at home.
Yeah. I don't
That's great.
know.
Well, I want to encourage people to try your products. Go to snackjacksons.com. And when you have your chips, think of Jackson and all the nutrition that is in this food, and what an influence he was in bringing products like this.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I am going to definitely put a link to your website, to the book that you had mentioned by Sally Falon, and I think you guys have a YouTube channel and all kinds of
We've got it all out there.
right media.
You can find us. You can find us through the website, and we've got everything people will need as far as snackjacksons.com will have everything they need as far as just information about us, the
All right.
brand.
Yeah. And thank
Go
you.
get a bag of.
Thank you, Dr. Haley, for what you're doing, right? So, we provide products that help people understand and this concept and scratch that itch. But these podcasts and information sharing that you're doing is just as essential a part of this evolution of the food chain and people's choices that they can make for themselves. So, thank you for being an important part of this ecosystem.
You guys are the best.
Thank you. It's been great talking with you.
I hope you enjoyed that episode today on The Dr. Haley Show. Make sure to hit subscribe on whichever platform you are listening to this. If this episode made you think of someone, go ahead, take a screenshot, and share this exact episode with them. You can catch the show notes for this episode on www.drhaley.com. If you want to geek out with Dr. Michael Haley on other radical health topics, be sure to check out his YouTube channel, where he posts exclusive video content. All the details are at www.drhaley.com, and we can't wait to hang out with you on the next episode.